The family of Joachim was not rich, though at the same time he could not have been called poor. Conformable to the honored standing of her family, Saint Anne desired to dress her most holy daughter as best she could afford within the bounds of decency and modesty. The most humble child yielded to this maternal solicitude during the time of her voluntary silence without protest. But when she began to speak, she humbly asked her mother not to clothe her in costly and showy garments, but to procure for her garments of coarse and poor material, if possible such as had already been worn by others, and of an ash-gray color, similar to that which in our day is worn by the nuns of St. Clare. The Holy Mother, who looked upon and respected her daughter as her mistress, answered, "My daughter, I will conform to thy desire in regard to the form and color of thy dress, but thy strength will not permit the coarseness which thou desirest, and in this regard I wish that thou obey me." The child, obedient to the will of her mother, and never objecting in anything, acquiesced and allowed herself to be clothed in the garments which were provided. They were of the color and form desired by her, and similar to the dress worn by children dedicated to a devout life. Although she desired them to be coarser and poorer, she supplied this want by obedience, deeming obedience more precious than sacrifice. Thus the most holy child Mary had the merit of obedience to her mother and of humility in her aspirations, deeming herself unworthy of the use of even that which is necessary to preserve natural life. In the virtue of obedience toward her parents, she was most distinguished and exact during the 3 years of her stay with them. By her divinely infused science, she knew their interior wishes, and thus she was beforehand in fulfilling them to the minutest point. She asked for the permission and blessing of her mother for whatever she undertook to do herself, kissing her hand with great humility and reverence. The mother outwardly permitted this, while inwardly she venerated the grace and exalted dignity of her daughter. At times she would retire to enjoy, by herself and with greater liberty, the company and intercourse of her holy angels, and to give outward tokens of the burning love of her spouse. In some of her exercises, she prostrated herself, tearfully afflicting that most perfect and tender little body of hers for the sins of mortals, supplicating the mercy and blessings of God for them, and striving to gain these favors by the exercise of heroic virtues. The grief of her heart on account of the sins made known to her, and the pangs of love with which it was accompanied, caused in the heavenly child intensest sorrow and pain. Nevertheless, in order to be in all things the mother of mercy and the mediatrix of grace, she taxed also her bodily strength during that tender age in works of penance and mortification, sparing no exertion that time and opportunity permitted in order to gain grace for herself and for us men. When she reached the age of 2 years, she began to exercise her special pity and charity toward the poor. She solicited alms for them of St. Anne, and the kind-hearted mother readily granted her petitions, both for the sake of the poor and to satisfy the tender charity of her most holy daughter, at the same time encouraging her, who was the mistress of mercy and charity, to love and esteem the poor. Besides giving what she obtained expressly for distribution among the poor, she reserved part of her meals for the same purpose, in order that from her infancy it might be said of her, more truly than of Job, "From my infancy compassion grew with me." She gave to the poor not as if conferring a benefit upon them, but as paying a debt due in justice, saying in her heart, This my brother and master deserves what he needs and what I possess without desert. In giving alms, she kissed the hands of the poor, and whenever she was alone, she kissed their feet, or, if this was impossible, she would kiss the ground over which they had passed. Never did she give an alms to the poor without conferring still greater favors on their souls by interceding for them and thus dismissing them relieved in body and soul.